move on to the next session. In this session, we are going to formally launch Bitan Chakraborty's new book, The Blight and 7 Short Stories. I repeat, The Blight and 7 Short Stories. It is authored by Bitan Chakraborty, who is, of course, a well-known Bengali short story writer, a translator, a critic and an editor, and most importantly, Bitan Chakraborty is the founder of Hawakal Publishers, the same publisher that has organized today's event. And this book, The Blight and 7 Short Stories, it has been translated from the original Bengali into English by none other than Malati Mukherjee, who lives in Kunur. And we have the moderator, poet, critic, translator, and fiction writer, Jagari Mukherjee, who will lead this session. I first request Jagari to please come on stage. For this session, we have Professor Akshaya Kumar from Panjab University. He is the Sarojini Naidu Chair in the Department of English, Panjab University. May I request Professor Kumar to please come on stage. And we have with us Professor Ajanta Paul, Principal and Professor, Department of English. Professor Paul, please come on stage. She is the Principal of Women's Christian College, Calcutta. Requesting both the author and the translator duo, Bitan Chakraborty and Malati Mukherjee, to please come on stage. Before I pass on the microphone to Jagari, the moderator for the session, I must congratulate both the author and the translator. Congratulations, Malati, congratulations, Bitan, for this wonderful, for this fabulous collection. And over to you, Jagari, to lead this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kiritida. A very good afternoon to everyone. And we will first start with launching the book. So, well, I saw posts about this program, and it is of course April. And everyone says that April is the cruelest month following Eliot. But why? I prefer Chaucer, who said, when April with his shower suit, the drought of March had pierced to the root. You know, when April with his sweet showers pierced the drought of March to its root, and we've been having rains. So in fact, it is our sweet April that we are having this program of April Rush. Many Aprils ago, when I was 9, my mother gifted me short stories of Guy de Maupassant. And the first story I read was, of course, the very acclaimed The Necklace, elsewhere translated as The Diamond Necklace. Of course, and it was a translated piece. I didn't know French at that time. And I wondered that if not for translations, then we would not have access to the works of greats like Maupassant and Chekhov and Isabel Allende and others. In the same way, Bitan's book of gorgeous short stories titled The Blight and 7 Short Stories can be accessed just because it has been, for many people, because it has been translated into English for those who cannot read Bangla, and also for those who would want to enjoy themselves by reading both the languages. The Blight reacquainted me with short stories once again after my childhood, as with a lover of my youth. In the very title story, Bitan weaves together both surrealism and magic realism into the very real fabric of what critic Dustin Pickering calls a social story. Some of the important actions, and Bitan is a theatre person, so action is very important. So a lot of the action takes place in the theatre of the protagonist Moni's mind. I had an informal talk with Bitan in the morning, and he said that much of his stories are born of dreams. No wonder that Bitan paints like, as well as unlike Dali, with words. And the experience of reading the collection is as intense as it is vibrant. Dustin also said that reading one of the stories, and perhaps I'm guessing due to its tragic intensity, is a harrowing experience. I would like to differ, because the tragic intensity is deftly cut into with scenes of breathtaking beauty, such as the description of a lovely aquarium in the Blight, and the giant moon imagery of land, or the color of the masks in the mask, and Puntu's realization of his own blessings. I interpreted land as a story of love beyond death, by the way. Okay, so I do not have much questions right now for the speakers. First, I'm eager to learn about their favorites, if any, of the stories, their impressions, and what went straight to the heart.
First of all, I'm thankful to Kirit and Bitan. Coming all the way from Chandigarh for this ceremony is an honor for me. To that, I have one disadvantage and one advantage, and both go together, that I don't know Bengali at all. But since I don't know Bengali, for me it becomes an original text. And I must tell you that it stands on its feet, and stories are well structured. When you say a favorite story, should I deselect the other ones? This is a dicey question, but I would say that the stories are in continuum with each other, and that Blight is not, as you were talking about April Rush, is not season specific. It runs through. In each poem you have a sense of the Blight. And why should I not say poem? Because the previous speaker was talking about a poem at times lapses into short story. I can say the reverse as well. Because the days of a pure short story, I think, are over, and there is this happy contamination of forms. If you look at these stories, at times they become dream sequences, at times they become a snippet of a travel, at times they become a kind of a reflection, a half philosophical reflection, at times just a prosaic description which has its critical quotient nevertheless, and also at times very symbolic and poetical. So to me, when I look at Blight for that matter, of course people would pounce upon Blight because one of its overarching canvas, it runs into more than 50 pages. And the story grows, rhizomatically, so to say. One section adds on to another section, and another section adds on to another section. And you get a 360 degree of the entire cultural, political scene of the times. But this is not to say the shorter stories have lesser kind of an arc. Because if you look at a story like Landmark, or a story like A Day's Work, I see in these stories there is, one thing I've always noticed, that short stories, a form is very slippery, and it is never stable, and every writer reinvents the form for himself, and happily so, because this is a form of literature which is at war with itself in very compelling ways. So if you look at this landmark also, and this, in Blight, on the other hand, there is a sense of closure. But if you look at landmark and A Day's Work, where you begin to believe that even though the phone has gone off and there is no charger available, and there is no access to GPS and to the phone and to the address, and you'll find that because we believe in a world of very, very definitive structures, we inhabit those structures, and we tend to believe that somewhere the protagonist will find the right address, but it never happens. And that postponement to me, for me, is that reinvention of story, because story has to somehow wriggle itself out from that sense of closure. Same thing happens in that A Day's Work, where that poor laborer, he happens to hit upon a coin which he thinks must bring him some money, but that coin, which is a little melodramatic in a way, that coin turns out to be a fake coin, and he never gets some money for his needs, for the needs of his son. So there is no attempt to complete the story with a sense of fulfillment. So I think even other stories, if you look at it, there is a story, spectacles also. So to me, all these stories are part of a sequence with Blight, in the lead. Thank you.
To carry this discourse further, I think I do agree with what my previous speaker has just mentioned. Blight, of course, is the title story, and we all know that blight is an agricultural phenomenon, a disease which affects crops and which often is responsible for ruining the harvest, either wholly or partially. Here, of course, it refers to corruption, rampant systemic corruption, which is there in every sphere of society. And it cuts across, all the discourses, all the stories, and we find that incidentally, blight was a term that had been used in the first part of the 20th century by sociologists, It was used to mean buildings which were in a state of disrepair, buildings which used to be inhabited by colored folk, and for which there was no scope for civic regeneration, as it were. So it's very interesting how Bitan Chakraborty has applied this metaphor of the blight to most of his stories. And talking about favorites, I would say that definitely Blight, the titular story, does make an impression because it sets the tone, as it were, and sets the theme of corruption which pervades the entire collection. But I would go for Landmark 2, which is of course a much shorter story, but I like it for, its very modernistic overtones. Because here we have Topon, the protagonist, who goes to Delhi on work, and he decides to pay a visit to his friend Jashar. And he sets out on the journey, but he fails to complete the journey for various reasons. And in a way, Jashar's aborted journey becomes a symbol of modern man's frustrated quest for meaning, for some kind of meaning in his life. And to extend this metaphor, I would, think of the 14th century Italian poet Dante Alighieri's, Inferno, where the doomed souls used to be trapped to the respective circles of hell. There would be no movement, no progression. And much closer to our times, I'm reminded of T.S. Eliot's The Hollow Men. We are told that they kind of represent a paralyzed force. Between the motion and the act falls the shadow. So they are shadowy creatures. And also I would think that I'm reminded of the modernist writer James Joyce's Dubliners, his collection of short stories, Doubleders, where he talks about paralysis, quote unquote paralysis, you know, and he himself suffered from this spiritual paralysis because he had wanted to flee the shores of Ireland. And many of his characters are shown to be circling, making circular movements without making any kind of progress. And he has a story called Two Gallants, in which a character called Lenehan is shown to be moving around the city, you know. So modern people, modern men and women who are registering movement but not necessarily making any progress. So I really like the story for its, you know, very potent symbolism, you know, for evoking a kind of Dantesque hell, for, you know, talking about this kind of modern paralysis which affects many of us. And another story which really caught my attention, is The Mask. And as all of you can imagine, it has a very evocative title, and we find that Puntu is the subaltern mask seller, and the mask, of course, represents the various hypocrisies that we affect in our daily lives. And there is Shubho, the theatre manager, you know, who is trying to get into a deal with Puntu, trying to earn some commission by getting him to sell the masks at a certain, they need the masks for a backdrop. And so he kind of gets into this nefarious negotiation with Puntu. So he is supposed to be the theatre manager, the stage manager, but he is also some kind of a middleman striking a deal. And then there's this character of Neil, who is having an affair with the office secretary. And, you know, he's of course, he's very good to his wife, he's very sweet with her. So there are these poses, there are these affectations, hypocrisies that we are forever affecting. So I really like Chakraborty's stories for the kind of symbolism that is so, you know, potent, and and of course, the surrealism which you also mentioned. And he's always setting up a contrast or a conflict between the verses of evil versus the forces of good, conflict between the different generations, conflict between different loyalties, between priorities, and also between, as has been already pointed out, that there is a conflict between styles, you know, styles and subgenres within the form of the short story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Akshaya and Ajanta Di. My next question is for Bitan. Now, Kiritida told me to use Bengali while talking to Bitan, but English boli? Okay. So I was reminded while reading your stories of the Greek concept of tragic hero. A tragic hero, according to the Greek concept, is somebody who is a puppet in the hands of fate and the hands of the gods. Whereas if we talk about a Shakespearean hero, as Professor A.C. Bradley said, character is destiny. So Macbeth is a very ambitious man, and Othello was somebody who loved not wisely but too well. Would you say that, or which category do your heroes, your protagonists belong to? Let's say we talk about Moni, Shubal, Puntu. Did you have did you have a concept in your mind while creating these unforgettable heroes?
अच्छा आमी बांग्लाते चलिए जाए सर मैं थोड़ी थोड़ी हिंदी में तो আমার সম্ভবত একটা সবচেয়ে বড় সুবিধে সেটা হচ্ছে যে আমি সাহিত্যের তত্ত্ব বা থিওরি পড়িনি, খানিকটা বিজ্ঞান পড়েছি, আর সাহিত্য বলতে মানে যেটা লেখকরা লিখেছেন আমি সেটা পড়েছি, তত্ত্ব পড়িনি। ফলে আমি হ্যাঁ মানে এই শব্দগুলো আমার কাছে অপরিচিত নয়, তার কারণ যখন আমরা অভিনয় করতাম বিশেষ করে যখন অ্যাডিপাউস পড়েছি তখন গ্রিক ট্র্যাজেডি বা শেক্সপিরিয়ান বিভিন্ন যে থিওরি হয় সেগুলো খানিকটা কানে গেছে, কিন্তু আমার সেগুলো মাথায় ঢুকেনি আর কি। এবং সম্ভবত সেটা যখন সফোক্লেস লিখেছেন বা শেক্সপিয়ার লিখেছেন তাদেরও ব্যাপারটা মাথায় ছিল না, কারণ এগুলো আমাদের কাছে লেখকদের কাছে এভাবেই আসে। যদি কারো কাছে না আসে, কেউ যদি থিওরিকে কেন্দ্র করে কোনো চরিত্রকে তৈরি করতে যায়, সেটা ওই শুকনো কাঠের মতো হয়। হ্যাঁ, সেটা
Unless somebody is as skilled as George Bernard Shaw in Man and Superman.
আচ্ছা, বার্নার্ড শো কি কখনো বলেছেন তিনি থিওরিকে কেন্দ্র করেই ক্যারেক্টার তৈরি করেছেন?
Man and Superman এ তো there is a long preface which says
না, মানে উনি কখনো বলেছেন সেটা আমার জানা নেই, মানে যদি জানা থাকতো হয়তো হতে পারে, কিন্তু মানে বার্নার্ড শো।
আচ্ছা,
তো আমার কাছে আমি কখনোই এরকমভাবে ভাবি না, তবে হ্যাঁ এই প্রশ্নটার একটা উত্তর আছে যে কেন আমার চরিত্ররা হেরে যাওয়া চরিত্র। আসলে আমাদের কাছে জিতে যাওয়া ব্যাপারটা কি? জিতে যাওয়া হচ্ছে যে অক্ষয় কুমারের সিনেমার মতো, আমি একটু সিনেমাকেও আনছি, বা অমিতাভ বচ্চনের সিনেমার মতো, যে একজন মানুষ সে তৈরি হবে, মানে তার জন্ম হবে, সে একটা স্ট্রাগল করবে এবং শেষে গিয়ে সমস্ত খারাপ লোকেদেরকে ঢিসুম ঢিসুম করে মেরে, মিঠুন চক্রবর্তী ঢুসুমও মারতে পারে, তো সেসব করে তারা জিতে যাবে। ওই একটু একটা সেশন হচ্ছিল যে হ্যাপিলি এভার আফটার, সেরকমভাবে তারা থাকবে। এবার যদি আমি সিনেমাটা তার যেখানে শেষ হলো সেখান থেকে দেখতে শুরু করি, অমিতাভ বচ্চনের নায়িকার সাথে বিয়ে হয়ে গেল, প্রেম মিটে গেল, ঝামেলা মিটে গেল, মিঠুন চক্রবর্তীর হয়ে গেল, শাহরুখ খানের হয়ে গেল, তারপরে যে সংসারটা চলছে সেখানে কি চলছে, মানে আমাদের প্রত্যেকের জীবনে কি চলে। আমি ছোট ছোট বিভিন্ন এক্সাম্পল দিই। আমরা যখন বাজার করতে যাই, মানে আমাদের কলকাতায় তো এটা খুব বড় কালচার বাজার করা, আমরা বাজার করতে গিয়ে প্রত্যেক দিন কোনো একটি জিনিসের কোনো একটা আনাজপাতির দাম নিয়ে প্রচুর ঝগড়া করি, মানে বার্গেনিং করি, এবং সেই ঝগড়াটা আমি মানে যেখানে যে মফস্বলে থাকি কলকাতায় এলে সেখানে সেটা বেশ মানে খুব বাজে পরিস্থিতিতেও কখনো কখনো যায়। কেউ একজন জেতে হয়, যে কিনছে সে 10 টাকা কম পায়, মানে কম দামে পায়, যে বিক্রি করছে সে 10 টাকা বেশি লাভ করে, এই হচ্ছে ফারাক। কিন্তু দিনের শেষে এই দুটো লোকই যখন বাড়ি ফিরে যখন সে তার দৈনন্দিন সংসারের হিসেবটা তৈরি করে, যখন দুজনেই ওয়ালেট খুলে দেখেন যে সামনের দিন যে বাজারটা করবে সেখানে গিয়ে তার 50 টাকা কম পড়ছে, তার মাইনেটা শেষ হয়ে গেছে বা তার রোজগারটা শেষ হয়ে গেছে, সেখানে তার জয়টা কোথায়? এই হচ্ছে আমার ক্যারেক্টার।
I would also like to add something to this particular question which you asked. Hello. So, I think Bitan's characters, more than anything else, they are real. So whether you call them defeated, they are not defeatist. I've never seen a defeatist character. They are people you can meet, and you do meet on the street every day. But we pass them by. We don't notice them. When you read the stories, then you begin to think that, oh my God, these are the people I'm passing by on the road every day. And that is the greatness of his stories. They force you to look at the ordinary man, to feel his pain, which we would never otherwise feel. And I think that is really what makes these stories great. Thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Bitan's heroes are defeated. I would say they are fighters. And they fight with their circumstances, perhaps with themselves. Their fights and struggles are very real, and that resonates somewhere with us. Malati ma'am, the next question is for you. Well, first of all, the process of translating, I haven't read the Bengali version yet, so I would ask you, how faithful a translation is it? Secondly, of course, the word faithful can be very charged. Like, what does it mean by faithful translation? So do you think that it is imperative for a translation to be faithful versus to embody the spirit of the piece? You know, faithful as in a word-by-word translation versus showing the spirit of the piece and changing things here and there, as long as it remains true to the essence of the story.
So it is important. I think both, the meaning of both that you said are the same. I think faithful translation means the translation where the spirit is caught and conveyed, communicated. What is it that the author is trying to say? To capture that, irrespective of the words used, to capture that and to be able to convey that to another set of readers. That, I think, it is. So it is not word by word, although that is the first step, but it's definitely not a word by word. It's the spirit. Did I answer that? Yeah.
Right, sure. So, the next one or two questions I'll ask, that would be for everybody to answer, whoever wants to. Now, Edgar Allan Poe, Rajushida will kill me, he's always like, we don't get out of the literary thing, Edgar Allan Poe and Shakespeare, and he has a thing against Poe in particular. However, Edgar Allan Poe, in the philosophy of composition, defines a short story as a piece that can be read in one sitting between half an hour to 2 hours. Like, there are many definitions of short story, beginning, middle, end, we all know. Okay, of flash fiction or 1,000 words, between 2,000 and 26,000 words, whatever. But this is what Poe says. Would you agree with this? Now, I personally would beg to differ. I think that there are stories that one can read slowly and one would like to savor over multiple sittings. That's what I felt about Bitan's stories. But what do you all think with reference to Bitan's stories? Would you think that we could finish it in one sitting, or would you think that it is supposed to be savored over several cups of tea?
Who would answer?
Or coffee?
As simple as this, short story is not a function of duration, as far as I know. And there are stories which are very cryptic and there are stories which take an expensive kind of a canvas. It all depends upon the kind of emotion that you're gripped in. So it's not a function of space and space in terms of the pages that you cover. And it's also a function of your patience. For you, one sitting could be of 3 hours, for me it is 30 minutes. So the question falls flat.
I think that, see, till date, there is no definite or conclusive definition of the length of a short story, you know. And we have short stories such as William Faulkner's The Bear, which is like 100 pages or so. Or let us think of James Joyce's The Dead, which is a very long story. And we have microfiction, which is about one paragraph.
Nano.
Yeah, the nanofiction. So it's very difficult to arrive at any conclusion regarding the length. And with regard to Bitan's stories, yes, you could read, let us say you could finish, but not complete. You could finish reading a story in one sitting, but it lingers in the mind, you know, and you ponder over it, and you make those connections. And then those connections lead to larger configurations in the mind. So it keeps growing incrementally, you know, like a musical symphony in the mind. And there's also the notion of dissonance, you know, as there has been a lot of talk on this, that when I'm reading it, I am interpreting it in my own way. So that freedom of interpretation is also there. So in that sense, it is what you make of it, in a sense.
Yes, I just add what she said about the story lingering in the mind. That's very, very true for all of Bitan's stories. And this is something that I think I also said in the last book launch in Delhi, that when I translate, after I do the first round, I keep it aside. I keep the book aside for about 2 weeks, allow myself to forget it, and then go back to it. In Bitan's case, the difficulty is you can't forget it. So in those 2 weeks, the stories are continuously playing in your mind. You know, they are real characters. So that's the
Jagari, may I add a word on translation? See, actually, I'm no expert on translation, but when I was reading the collection, I was struck by the simplicity, you know, the simplicity that is born of profundity, actually. And as Malati has mentioned, that he has been striving to capture the spirit or the essence of the story, and she has done that beautifully. And the idiomatic English that she uses, you know, I find it is the very idiom is very, very, you know, adequate, and it reads very lightly as a result.
That is true. Also, yes, regarding the length of the short story, I have read that the world's shortest story was only of 6 words by Ernest Hemingway. Baby shoes for sale, never worn.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Muhammad Ali says. Muhammad Ali made two.
So, yes. So my next question, again for everybody and anybody who wants to answer. Now, I think that in the stories, Bitan enters into the heart and the soul of the characters. And although most of the stories, they have a third-person narrative technique, I could hardly say that they have an omniscient narrator because, he picks up a particular character and he writes from their perspective. So, for example, Moni or Monosha or Puntu, okay, the stories would be from their perspective. He gets into the heart and soul and puts himself into the shoes of the characters. So, what do you think of that?
Well, I'm not very happy with this kind of a phrase, heart and soul. Story is more a form of slippages. The more you miss, the more you get to the story. Heart and soul, if you get to the heart and soul, then you rehearse. You understand? The story for me is not an execution of a symbol, it's not an execution of an essential idea. Story is not about fidelity as you're talking about. Stories are all about these gaps, these slippages, and that is the residence of story. If story begins to just say what it wants to say, then my hunch is that it may not have that tension. It's a story, it's a form of slippages to my mind.
As Professor Kumar had pointed out earlier, that a story such as Landmark, it doesn't have a closure, right? And I feel that instead of leading towards the climax, it actually achieves an anticlimax. Because the facility store owner, he talks, like, why had Topun missed the landmark, the landmark which would have led him to his friend's house. What was the landmark? 2 butchers' shops at the mouth of a lane. But these shops had disappeared over time. And so he couldn't locate his friend's house. And so when he is unable to reach his friend's house, he decides to have a patty at a convenience store. And then he starts talking to the store owner, and the store owner enlightens him about the fate of those, the owners of the butcher shops, the meat shops, And he says that they had been killed, they had been chopped into mincemeat, and possibly the indication is that, it had been stuffed into the patties which were consumed by the unsuspecting consumers. So this is a kind of an anticlimax, This is a kind of slippage, a kind of gap, a kind of an ellipsis, in which much of the meaning resides.
Right, that is true. My last question. I feel like an examiner or somebody taking a viva, actually.
We are not easy students.
That's why the punishment. So the world that Bitan conjures up like a magician, in spite of the heavy surreal touches, I find it still relevant and resonant. We can still relate to such a world. How do you think he achieves it, and do you agree that you kind of, I mean, this world resonates with us in spite of the surrealism and magic realism that I found in Blight and the other stories?
See, this world, I feel, more than anything, is raw, unflinching reality. The contemporary scene, the land-grabbing local mafia, the so-called quote-unquote syndicate, we are all familiar with this thing. This is what Partha Chatterjee in his writings had described as quote-unquote political society, where we have unscrupulous businessmen, government officials, unscrupulous politicians, and they are in an unholy nexus with criminals like Ashish in the first story, in the title story, or Niladri in the site, So antisocial elements, they gain precedence because of these things. And that is what we get to see. And if you think of the part in the first story, when father and son, they are in a fight, and the manner in which the son, Ashish, has been described, there's something so destructive, so carnivorous about him. When he is eating mutton, significantly, he is eating mutton, devouring mutton, and the two of them get into a fight. And so it is something which is our everyday reality, in spite of the surrealism, and it does resonate in that sense.
One is that I'm also not in favor of reading a story along the moral lines. And the characters which are shown in a so-called poor light it is a question of executing a character in terms of his role. So there is to me, to put a story within a moral compass would be one that it would go against the whole mandate of story, which has to be a real story, and two, that it has to open possibilities rather than close the possibilities of choices.
In the story Reflection, for example, the end is very ambivalent. We don't really know who is the alter ego, so in that sense it opens up possibilities. And there is also no moral judgment. In that particular story, I find.
Those are the correct answers. You all are good students. Okay, so I would like to invite Malati ma'am to read a bit from the book, and
We capture even a boundless ocean into a 10 by 12-inch aquarium. And there we add all the beautifully colored fish, golden, silver, red, blue, and yellow. We even keep baby sharks in that tiny space. Nowadays, everyone looks for a flat with a balcony facing either east or south to start a little garden. People want to capture the world's forests in that little corner of their veranda. On Sunday evenings, they stand in that bit of space with teacups, gazing at the sky. That 30 square feet of sky belongs only to them. It does not come free. There is a price for that too.
thank you so much, Malati ma'am. That is my absolutely favorite portion of the book, beautifully written, gorgeously translated. So with this, we wrap up this session. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all so much. Congratulations, Bitan and Malati ma'am, on the formal launch of the book. Thank you, Professor Akshaya Kumar. and Ajanta Di. Thank you, your lovely audience.